A disgraced corporate mogul, millions of dollars worth of fraud, fake passports, and a Hollywood movie-style heist to smuggle one man out of a country that's left a former Green Beret and his son in Japanese custody. This is Military Matters. This episode of Military Matters is brought to you by Navy Federal Credit Union. Navy Federal puts members first by helping them save money, make money, and enjoy peace of mind and security through personalized around-the-clock service. On average, Navy Federal members earn and save $361 more per year. You can pay no fees, get low rates, and rate discounts, plus earn cash back and grow your savings. Visit NavyFederal.org for more information. Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
The case of Mike Taylor, former Special Forces officer, and his son Peter have made international headlines as the pair recently lost their legal battle to avoid extradition to Japan on the charges of harboring a fugitive, but more specifically, smuggling an automotive executive out of Japan. Jack Murphy has been covering the story for about a year now. Jack, take us into what this whole thing is about.
Yeah, well, I've been covering this story for probably close to a year now, since it pretty much first happened, since Carlos Ghosn was smuggled out of Japan and Michael Taylor's name came to the forefront as allegedly the person who participated in facilitating that. So I've been writing about this off and on for quite a while now, and I thought a good place to start this episode was talking to one of Mike's former teammates from when he was in Special Forces and hearing some of the background on him.
My name's Rocco Procopio, retired 20-year Special Forces veteran, retired as Sergeant Major. Spent about 16 years of my Special Forces career in either one of two Special Mission units, and now I work in the commercial industry.
Mike and Rocco were both in 2nd Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group. Mike was in Alpha Company, part of the Free Fall team, and Rocco was in Bravo Company on the Rucksack team. During those early years, Mike and Rocco didn't see much of each other.
You see them out at night. There's a couple of local establishments we used to frequent, would meet up there. And then, on occasion, the companies would do training together, but that wasn't very often.
But they did skydive together.
Actually, Mike taught me how to skydive back in 1980.
Did Rocco see any signs that Mike was going down this path that he's alleged to have gone down?
No, not at all. According to Rocco, Mike was never the controversial type. He described him as benevolent, but a very competent individual.
Very physically fit, was a good military free fall jumper, was a good team player, and that's all important in special operations. You can't be an individual on a special forces team. It just doesn't work. And Mike wasn't. Mike was truly a team player, was always one to keep up spirits when things got a little tough.
Rocco described the kind of guy that you can teach something to once, and then the next time you saw him, he'd be doing it even better than you ever did. He could be intimidating in a lot of ways, but also compassionate.
He's the type of person that would always check on you if you were hurt or if you were ill or something happened. Always there to help. Mike would always take care of the folks, especially if they're special operators. He was just that kind of guy.
In 1983, Rocco and Mike would find themselves deployed to Lebanon in the midst of the Lebanese Civil War.
His team got there first. My company, especially my team, arrived probably 4 weeks after their arrival in country. They were the first group on the ground. They set up the appropriate camps, and there was a camp training down by the airport in Beirut, that famous airport where the Marines were stationed. And there was another camp way up in the mountains. And Mike's team was up in the mountains, and that's where my team was assigned. I was up in the mountains of Juni.
Mike's ties to Lebanon would also play a critical role as the country where Carlos Ghosn was brought back home after allegedly being smuggled out of Japan by Mike Taylor and his youngest son, Peter, who is now 28 years old. But Rocco will tell you that despite how Mike has been portrayed by the media, he sees him in a very different light.
And, he's just a strong, very well-moraled, contrary to what people see in the papers, individual. I can't really get into a lot of detail about the things he's done for this country, both for the U.S. military and for other government agencies, but it's extensive.
Rocco gave me several examples of Mike Taylor using his years of experience in special operations to help return kidnapped children to families and to help rescue journalists. Due to the sensitive nature of these operations and for respect to the families, I can't get into the details, but I can confirm at least one of these stories is true because I personally spoke with the mother of one of those kidnapped children.
He's brought back a number of people that could not have done it without him. And, frankly, he doesn't do it for the money. He does it for the opportunity to help someone. And there are a number of these people that have stood up in his defense, especially I know there's 2 in California. I can't name their names, but those 2 in California were adamantly supporting Mike because without Mike's contacts, they would not have their child.
There have been a number of stories recently that have casted a not so great light on special operations. I mean, we ourselves covered the story of a Delta Force operator shooting a Green Beret. Do you think these stories have had any impact on how Mike Taylor's case is being viewed by the media?
There's this sort of public perception right now that special ops has gone wild. A lot of those stories have broken in the press. Some of them are pretty gruesome, but Mike's story doesn't really fall in that category at all. What he is accused of is not a violent crime. And in fact, Mike Taylor and his son Peter are being accused by the Japanese government of harboring a fugitive. It's a far cry from some of the more sensational stories we've heard coming out of the special operations community in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, these are just so many things. And a lot of the press that you hear that's been elevated to a different level is just sad. And they don't know him personally. And it's actually quite disturbing that the U.S. government is kind of just brushed it aside like it's nothing.
Although the charges of harboring a fugitive is in a completely different category than shooting up a bowling alley, for example, Mike Taylor has a checkered past as well. He has been involved in all sorts of things throughout his life. There's a very interesting cast of characters at play here that range from mercenary Eric Prince to spy master Dewey Claridge. There was even a incident where he was accused of bid rigging in a contract in Afghanistan to support the Kandak commandos. And Mike was arrested and he was put in prison by our government. And he was held for 14 months. When I had conversations with Mike about this, he told me that it was trumped up charges, essentially, that there was only one other bidder on the contract. And what they submitted was only 2 pages. It wasn't even an acceptable bid. It wasn't technically acceptable. So really, him and his partner were the only ones who had a viable bid on that contract, which is why they got it. So they came to him and they said, hey, look, we'll let you out of jail and give you a little bit of your money back if you plead guilty to a few of the charges, not all of them, which he did so that he could get out of prison. I think this also speaks to why Mike is bitter about the justice system in our country. It's because of that incident and because of the one he found himself in more recently with Carlos Ghosn, that he has a distrust of the criminal justice system. When we come back from the break, we talk about the case that landed former Green Beret Mike Taylor and his son Peter into Japanese custody when we return.
If you're an active duty service member, veteran, DoD civilian, or military family member, you can join Navy Federal. That means if you served in any branch of the military, doesn't have to just be the Navy, could be the Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, or Coast Guard, you can join the Navy Federal Credit Union. On average, Navy Federal members earn and save $361 more per year. You could pay no fees, get low rates and rate discounts, plus earn cash back and grow your savings. Navy Federal puts members first by helping them save money, make money, and enjoy peace of mind and security through personalized around-the-clock service. Plus, now is a great time to join. Have a large credit card balance after the holidays? Let Navy Federal Credit Union help you rebalance your priorities. Make a plan to do away with high-interest credit card debt by transferring your balance to a Navy Federal credit card. With a low intro APR and no balance transfer fees, you can pick the right card to help you take back control. Visit NavyFederal.org. Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission. And now the fine print. Insured by NCUA. Dollar value of Navy Federal's 2019 member give back study. 5.99 to 18% variable APRs based on product type and credit worthiness, up to $1 cash advance transaction fee at non-Navy Federal ATMs. Carlos Ghosn was a celebrated businessman. The Brazilian-born executive is the son of a former diamond trader, alleged diamond, gold, and drug smuggler, Jorge Ghosn. Now, side note, Jorge Ghosn was allegedly involved in the murder of a Lebanese priest whom he allegedly killed to prove his love for Lebanese singer Sabah. So there's that. Carlos, on the other hand, would find himself climbing the corporate ladder in the automotive industry, eventually finding himself at the very top of companies such as Michelin, Renault, Mitsubishi, and Nissan. From 2001 all the way to 2017, Carlos Ghosn would win numerous awards and accolades. He topped the 2001 Time magazine's list of global influentials. He was Fortune's 2002 Asia Businessman of the Year and 2003's Man of the Year. He'd also later earn a spot, ironically enough, in the Japanese Automotive Hall of Fame and become the first person in the auto industry to win a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Strategic Management Society, a nonprofit group that promotes ethical and strategic business stewardship. His life story was even turned into a Japanese manga, or a comic book, called The True Story of Carlos Ghosn. Then on November 19, 2018, at a Japanese airport, before he could board his private jet, Carlos was arrested by Japanese authorities. He was stripped of his position with Nissan and overnight became something of a pariah in the very industry the year before had celebrated him. He was accused of shady business practices, using company money to pay for personal expenses to include venture investments, renovating his homes, and purchasing luxury apartments. The government of Japan was especially interested in his avoidance of reporting his full compensation in Nissan financials as required by Japanese law. For a little over a year, Carlos Ghosn would post bail, then be rearrested with an ever-growing stack of charges against him. Those charges would amount to tens of millions of dollars worth of fraud and include not only corporations, but would even involve the nation of France opening its own investigation against Carlos. All of this comes to a head on December 30th, 2019, when Carlos Ghosn suddenly pops up in Beirut, Lebanon, a good 5,000 miles away from Japanese authorities and where he was supposed to be under house arrest awaiting trial. In a prepared statement, Carlos said that he, quote, had escaped injustice and political persecution. He initially refused to state how he'd escaped Japan, saying only that he was used to, quote, mission impossible. So how did Carlos Ghosn get out of Japan, and what does this have to do with Mike and Pete Taylor?
So let's talk about Carlos Ghosn for 1 second here. We need to back up just a little bit. So according to Mike, Ghosn was arrested on trumped-up charges and essentially being held indefinitely. So now this is alleged what happened. I cannot confirm or deny, but this has been reported previously in the press. It has been alleged that Mike Taylor went to Japan and engineered a situation in which Carlos Ghosn was allowed. He left home. So he was sort of on like notional house arrest, like he was at his home, and Carlos just left. Like he just walked out the door and left. I'm not sure if he was even being guarded or not. Got on a bullet train, took off, and then got to an airfield. And then what's alleged to have happened is that he was loaded onto a music case, like one of those black boxes that like speakers or musical instruments are put in, that had air holes drilled in the bottom. So Carlos Ghosn is then put into one of those cases, the lid's closed, and carted onto a privately chartered jet, which then flew from Japan to Istanbul, where Carlos was then cross-loaded onto another aircraft and flown back home to Beirut. So I got a hold of Mike and Peter Taylor's attorney, Paul Kelly, to go over where this case currently stands. At the time of the interview, they were still awaiting extradition to Japan. Since that interview, they have been handed over to the Japanese authorities and have been flown to Japan. So they are now in Japanese custody. But Paul's statements about Mike's case are important to understand how the situation evolved and where it currently is right now.
We have effectively exhausted all efforts in the courts.
That's attorney Paul Kelly.
Including having taken an emergency appeal seeking a stay from the United States Supreme Court, which was denied about a week ago. In addition, we sent a lengthy letter to the U.S. State Department asking them to review the matter. We had appealed to the State Department when Secretary Pompeo was leading the department, and they kind of backhanded our correspondence, didn't give us a meeting, really, frankly, gave us very little consideration. And so our hope was that Secretary of State Blinken would take the matter and review it more seriously, more carefully. We just, within the last 24 hours, received a letter from the State Department declining our requests to halt or delay the extradition. The only thing that the current State Department has done is has indicated that it intends to communicate to Japan that Michael and Peter should be entitled to receive credit for the entire time that they have been detained here in the U.S. awaiting extradition to Japan, which is from May 20th to the present, which I believe is about 9 months that they've been incarcerated. So at this point, both the judicial effort as well as the kind of executive branch effort has been exhausted. And we expect, as you suggest, that they will be transported to Japan probably within a matter of days.
Throughout this story, we've talked almost exclusively about Mike's part of this case. We haven't really delved into Peter Taylor's side of the story. For all intents and purposes, the case against Peter has been very different than that of Mike. Peter is also being charged with harboring a fugitive, but the evidence of those charges is far weaker than those against Peter. Court papers filed by the Japanese investigators even stated that they didn't really have any evidence to support the allegations that have been made against Peter, but still Japan requested Peter's extradition, and they received it. I mean, he was extradited just a few days ago.
Yeah, there really is no evidence, and we've tried to make that point repeatedly in our court filings. My guess is that once the Japanese actually focus on Peter and the complete lack of evidence that they have that he was involved in any violation of their laws, they will find some way to summarily respond to and dispose of his case. Because there really is he was not involved. He was not, at the scene of the airport when things occurred. He was not on the flights. He was in a different country at the time. And it's unfortunate because Peter Taylor doesn't have any criminal history whatsoever, not even a parking ticket. He's a 28-year-old bright young guy, college grad, athlete, really likable young man. And, he's been detained for this length of time and is now going to be sent to this, as we understand it, questionable setting in Japan, which has a history of mistreating prisoners, particularly prisoners from foreign countries.
Now, whenever I think of Japan, I don't exactly think of prisons, much less prisoner mistreatment. I've always thought of Japan as being cutting edge and kind of assumed that they'd be somewhat humane with their legal system.
Yeah, and that's the thing you got to think about here, Rod, is there are only two countries in the world that have an extradition treaty with Japan, and that's the United States and South Korea, because of the deplorable conditions in their prisons and their approach to quote unquote justice. A lot of people in America don't know much about Japan outside of anime and video games and Solid Snake, but the Japanese prisons have a very harsh reputation. They have been cited in Amnesty International reports, even by our own State Department, for the human rights abuses that go on there. So yeah, it is all, it does have a cultural facet to it, that this is based around a culture of shame, and that when you have been shamed, you are supposed to confess your sins and acquiesce to the authorities. And that is the system in which Mike and Peter Taylor now find themselves. It should be noted that as Paul Kelly and the attorneys for Mike and Peter Taylor exhausted all legal options here in the United States, the judge that oversaw that case, the American judge named Talwani, she said that the prison conditions in Japan are deplorable, and what they will face there is not really in accordance with what we think of as justice. And yet she did not bar their extradition.
So it seems like everyone in the Mike and Peter Taylor case, from the lawyers and judge all the way up to the State Department, are aware of these abuses that that these two American citizens are going to be facing, one of which is a military veteran and the other lacking evidence to support extradition. but they're nevertheless being extradited to deplorable, inhumane conditions. How are we letting this happen?
That's what I wanted to know from Mike and Peter's lawyer. How exactly did we get to this point?
Yeah, it's very troubling, frankly, and it should have troubled the courts to a larger degree than it did, and it should certainly trouble the State Department. I mean, Japan is well known to have what they call a, quote, hostage justice system. You know, they have a conviction rate that runs around 98%, which is incredible. And I say that as a former assistant United States attorney working for the Justice Department myself for 10 years. And the reason for it is many documented cases show that they place these inmates in windowless cells with no bed or mattress in very cold temperatures. They leave the lights on 24 hours a day. They interrogate them for hours at a time without the benefit of legal counsel. Whether they engage in physical torture, I can't really say, but, we expect that Michael and Peter will be deprived of basic civil and human rights. And for example, we're experiencing it this week. We've been asking the Justice Department and the U.S. Marshal Service for the opportunity to provide both Michael and Peter a small bag containing clothing, warm clothing, because right now it's still winter in Japan. The temperature is in the mid-30s on average. They have only the one set of clothes that they were wearing when they were arrested back in May. Of course, while they've been detained, they've been given prison garb, but Japan does not issue prison garb. People who are held in custody in Japan have to wear their own clothes. And right now, the Department of Justice and the Marshal Service and the facility are refusing to accept any kind of clothing or other materials. And so, it's really an untenable, inhuman situation where Michael and Peter are going to be grabbed by probably 3 or 4 escort agents from Japan, put on a plane, flown to Tokyo, put in custody, and have frankly, nothing but the current clothes that are on their back. It just, our country really ought to treat citizens better, and particularly citizens with a distinguished record in history as a veteran.
Mike and Peter Taylor were denied the most basic requirements, even by Japanese standards, warm clothing, denied by U.S. authorities. They arrived in Japan where the lows as of this recording are in the mid-30s. They don't have warm clothes, and the prison cells are, of course, not heated. Previously incarcerated foreigners have reported sleeping in cells without a bed or a mattress, just a cold concrete floor they had to curl up on trying to stay warm.
And I would think that the United States would not want to have an extradition treaty with a country that does not treat people with basic human rights.
Mike and Peter have now been extradited. They are currently in Japanese custody. I wanted to know what they could be facing now from the Japanese authorities.
Yeah, my guess is that they are going to interrogate them extensively, and I think on 2 topic areas. One, they're going to want to know how Mike was able to do this in their view. And 2, I think they're still particularly bitter at this Carlos Ghosn, and they're going to ask a number of questions probably aimed at is there anything that they can do, to continue their efforts to secure the presence of Mr. Ghosn back in Japan. Michael is a tough guy, obviously, as a former Special Forces officer, and his son is a fit, athletic young man, and I suspect that both of them are in a good position to endure whatever the Japanese try to throw at them. But, interestingly, the charge against them, which is, quote, harboring someone, carries with it a maximum penalty of 3 years. Based on our research, no one in Japan has ever received a sentence of more than 2 years. And even if you get a sentence of 2 years in Japan, you probably serve about 15 months. They have already served 9 months. Extraditions normally involve very serious offenses, murder, major drug trafficking, major financial crimes where people are facing 10, 20, 30 years in prison. Here, they have gone to all of this terrible trouble for an offense literally where they could be sentenced to 15, maybe 18 months to serve, more than half of which they've already served. So frankly, I think that at this point, the Japanese will likely look for some type of a fairly quick plea that will result in Michael and Peter hopefully serving some remaining period of time and being released, within about a year and returned home. At least that's the hope. It wouldn't make any sense for Michael to sit there for years awaiting a trial because he will long have elapsed the period of time that he would be exposed to.
Paul and his team have moved to hire counsel that is licensed to practice law in Japan. Those lawyers would be fluent in the language and well-versed on the Japanese court system. Unfortunately, the current COVID-19 restrictions don't allow foreign visitors, which makes it very difficult for Paul and his team to help directly with Mike and Peter's legal efforts. At this point, the goal of Mike and Peter's American and Japanese legal team may be to go for a plea bargain and do whatever it takes to get them home quickly.
People need to appreciate the fact that it really is unfortunate when you have two U.S. citizens sent to a foreign country based upon the facts and circumstances of this case. Unfortunately, we have found our political figures, senators, congressmen, appointed executive branch folks within the Justice Department and the State Department to really be very cold and lacking in compassion, and even lacking in taking the time to think about and consider whether or not they should step up and advocate for these people. It really has been frustrating and very disappointing. And frankly, anybody who is facing, this type of a situation in the future, I wish you a lot of luck because, we've had an excellent team of lawyers, a very active family, and it has been like hitting a stone wall. And I really am disappointed at the behavior of some of our elected officials.
Well, for us, we're always going to be there for Mike.
Rocco Procopio.
I think the extradition is just an appeasement. Why take him to Japan? I just don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think everyone knows that the Japanese penal system has a 99.9% conviction rate. So what's that tell you? There's a lot of coercion happening there. Mm-hmm. And it's known. It's widely known. I'm not coming up with any, revelations here. So I think that we as Americans should be very concerned that we could be extradited to a foreign country at will by a prosecutor who demands that they want to have him in their country to try him. So basically, Mike's being held on the word of a prosecutor, on the demand of a prosecutor from a foreign nation.
Jack, what's the point of this whole extradition? It sounds very political. Is the U.S. worried about strained relations with Japan? Is that why they went along with this? Or are there other circumstances here that we're not talking about?
That's a good question. There are allegations that there is some sort of quid pro quo in the background. There are certainly the nationalistic sentiments from the Japanese, both pride and shame, when it comes to this case. There are also allegations that this has something to do with several destroyers being sold to the Japanese government by our government. There's other things that are happening in the background as well with Japan. I interviewed several people actually this year regarding the Japanese funding of the International Criminal Courts, the ICC, which is currently trying to charge American military special forces and CIA personnel in Afghanistan for war crimes. There are some elements from the United States that would like to pressure Japan to pressure the ICC by withdrawing their funding, because the Japanese government funds something like 40-50% of the ICC. Does that play into any of this at all? I really don't know. There are larger political ramifications and machinations at play behind the scenes. So there is more to this than just Mike Taylor.
Now, you had a chance to speak with Mike Taylor over the phone, but the quality of the audio was pretty bad. I suppose upgrading telephone receivers isn't at the top of the priority list for jails and prisons, but you did take careful notes. You spoke with Mike directly. What does he have to say about all of this?
What Mike wanted to go on the record with me the other day was basically to just express his outrage with the politicians in this country. He feels betrayed because of the things that he did for our country, some of them in uniform, some of them out of uniform. If you read up on Mike, he was supposedly asked to track down counterfeiters in Lebanon for our government, that he was asked and helped break up a drug trafficking ring in the United States for our government. So and then, of course, whenever the State Department found themselves in this situation that they could not recover an American child because they had been kidnapped to a non-extradition signatory country, they called Mike and asked him if he could take care of it for the parents. And in many instances, he was able to do that. So yes, Mike feels embittered, to say the least.
I'm very curious. How does he feel about getting his son wrapped up in this? I know as a father, I don't know how I would be handling a situation where, my son is now wrapped up in this and he is going to a Japanese prison. How does he feel about that? And what's the family's kind of perspective on this?
Mike thinks it's total bullshit. And it has said, Peter is wholly innocent of all of this. I have spoken to, friends and family members, and they believe that really Peter is just being used as a way to get to Mike, that the Japanese want to put the screws to his son so that they can coerce a confession out of Mike. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I have seen the court documents that have been submitted with information from the Japanese investigators. And I mean, it's a clown show. Their evidence against Peter is a joke. It all hinges on whether or not he handed off a hotel key card, like an elevator key card, to Carlos Ghosn in Japan. And apparently there isn't any evidence of it. They got nothing. So why we even extradited Peter, I'm not really clear on.
Something that Paul Kelly, Mike's attorney, said kind of haunts me as we wrap this episode up is, good luck if you're the next person on the chopping block. Good luck if you're the next person who's being accused of a crime in a foreign country, because it doesn't feel like the State Department's going to have your back.
Yeah, man. And, if I were to editorialize a little bit here at the end, I would say, if Mike broke the law, then he needs to face justice. That he needs to, is prosecution in order? I don't know, but I mean, if he, or I would say this for anyone. I've covered a lot of cases over the years about former special forces members, which I am one as well. But if you did the crime, you do the time. I'm not playing favoritism with anyone here. However, my issue with this is that I don't believe Mike and Peter Taylor are facing justice in this case. And I strongly disagree, not with them facing justice, but with them facing torture, with them facing coercion and coercive methods to elicit a confession. I think that's completely inappropriate. I think the same for us on the American side. I don't think we should be involved with things like enhanced interrogation, which include sleep deprivation, waterboarding, measures like that. I don't think America should be involved in that sort of stuff at all. And I think it's inappropriate for us to turn over our citizens, whatever they're accused of, to foreign criminal justice systems that will use those types of techniques to elicit confessions. And it's beyond me why we would honor an extradition treaty with a system like that.
So what happens next? I know they're in Japan now. I don't know if we've gotten any word about how they're doing or what's happened so far. This just happened over this last week, I believe. What happens next?
It's impossible to know. But I think it's probable to speculate that the Japanese will try to get him to confess. And then there will be some sort of negotiation. I don't know what form that will take. I don't know how much legal representation Mike and Peter are entitled to in Japan. But if you look at it, based on my conversations with Paul Kelly, the crime they're charged of, the maximum sentence is like 3 years. They've already served 9 months in an American prison. The time served, it should be honored. And our government asked the Japanese to honor that as time served. So now, apparently nobody actually gets 3 years for this crime. They get like the max sentence anyone's ever gotten is like 1.5 years. So now we're looking at 1.5 years minus 9 months for time served. So we're looking at like under 1 year at this point. So it seems probable that the Taylors may go for a plea bargain because, as we talked about with Carlos Ghosn, they could just get arrested and rearrested over and over without being charged in a crime, without being charged with a crime, and they end up sitting in prison without going to trial for years. And then they finally do get to a trial. That's going to take at least a year in of itself. So they will end up spending more time in prison that way than if they cop to a plea bargain. So there's a certain amount of pragmatic calculus that's going to take place. And, you know, Mike is a smart guy. He's a tough guy. I'm sure he's going to make the smartest decision he possibly can.
I have a lot of sympathy for Mike and Peter. And like you said, if you did the crime, you do the time. But I have a real problem with the way this seems to have unfolded. This wasn't a violent crime. This wasn't a matter of somebody got murdered. This doesn't reach that point where it seems like extradition was the logical conclusion here. On top of it, the most they're going to do if found guilty is, you know, under a year if they do the time served. 3 years max. I don't know. This doesn't seem like it qualifies for extradition, yet we went along with it.
Yeah, and another facet of this that Mike gets really angry about is the Tanaka airbags case. And there's this company, a Japanese company, they sold faulty airbags for cars, the car airbags that killed people. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like well over a dozen people who were killed by these airbags. And Japan refuses to extradite. These people were wanted for, these executives in Tanaka airbags, they're wanted for manslaughter, like actually killing people. And Japan will not extradite them.
This episode was written and produced by Jack Murphy and Rod Rodriguez. Additional editing and sound design by Clear Combo Studios. Executive produced by Joe Fleming. Huge thanks to our guest, Rocco Procopio, Paul Kelly, and Mike Taylor. Make a plan to do away with high-interest credit card debt by transferring your balance to a Navy Federal credit card. With a low intro APR and no balance transfer fees, you can pick the right card to help you take back control. Visit NavyFederal.org. Navy Federal Credit Union, our members are the mission. Leave us a review and a 5-star rating if you think we deserved it on whatever podcast player you use. Those reviews really do help us reach new audiences. And be sure to share this podcast. We grow through word of mouth. You can find Military Matters everywhere you listen to podcasts, or go to stripes.com and click on the podcast tab. We're always free to listen to. Use promo code PODCAST and save 50% on your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes. You can follow us on Twitter. Jack Murphy is at Jack Murphy RGR. And you can find me, Rod Rodriguez, at RodPodRod. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And we'll see you at the next episode.